Hello and welcome back to the Joel versus Arthritis podcast. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Dr. Ashley Perkins, pharmacist and mental health advocate. Those of you that were with us before will know that we talked in detail about Ashley's journey, and since then, her journey just keeps going. She's written her debut book, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So yeah, hello
My
Ashley.
book?
I feel like you should say hello at this point, so I don't leave you out too long.
Hello, look, my book.
Yeah, it looks amazing. And for anyone who's listening to this back, guys, we record these live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Joel versus Arthritis on Sunday evenings. So feel free to come and check us out, and then you can get involved in chat. But yeah, like, I've got a book as well, not that Ashley's going to see, but we can double our amount of two books. So yeah, do you
I've
want
got a
to?
whole box. I have a whole box. So
Don't worry, we will
anyone.
plug at the end where people can get that from. So don't worry. I appreciate you giving up your Sunday. What is it, afternoon there?
Yes,
Yeah.
afternoon.
Yeah, cool.
Sorry I'm late.
No, you're fine. Nobody needs to know. It's not a problem. I
It's
just.
okay. I tell on myself anyway. It's all good.
So basically,
I'm doing well.
for anyone who wasn't here when you joined us, I think it was back in May. It feels like more recent than that, but the year is flying
Oh,
by. So do you want to just give everyone a little introduction again, who you are, what you do,
sure.
and give a bit more information than I did?
I can do that. So I'm Ashley. I am a pharmacist and an educator. So I teach pharmacy technician students at a community college here in Florida. Um, so what's the best thing to tell you quickly? So I started my career out as a pharmacist. So I worked for CVS and I worked for a grocery store pharmacy and then some other independent pharmacies for about 10 years. And then that burnt me out because unfortunately, in the community pharmacy setting, you, pharmacists don't necessarily get treated the best, along with pharmacy technicians, overworked. So I needed something different. So I started teaching. I taught pharmacy students first, and then when we moved to Florida, I started teaching pharmacy technician students, and I love it. But back in 2019, I was discriminated against for my mental health. And that's what started my mental health advocacy because that's when I realized if somebody like myself, who has a lot of privilege, a lot of education, knows what to look for when it comes to stigma, discrimination, and all of that, if it can happen to me, it can happen way too easily to just about anybody. So that's when I realized that I needed to do something. And when I started, I didn't know what to do, how to do it, but I just knew I needed to do something. So I just started doing something. I joined Twitter in June of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. And I was like, I'm just going to start tweeting. And I guess I started saying the right stuff because I started to get a bit of a following. And I had just started our nonprofit with my friend John, and we just started to get the word out there and we started to do peer support, and here we are 2.5 years later, and I just published a book and I've done a lot of speaking, and our nonprofit is growing a lot, and it's been a wild ride, but I love doing it. And it's what we need to be doing because stigma and discrimination because of mental health shouldn't be a thing. And normalization, we should be able to talk about mental health like it's cancer, like it's heart disease, like it's diabetes. No one should be afraid to talk about mental health. So that's why we do this.
And what a good job you do it too. Ashley's very much underselling herself there with the whole Twitter thing. Like, you were turbocharged on Twitter, from what I remember. Like, the following you gained, and you got the Uyghur award
Yeah.
as well, and like, it's all very much deserved. Do you want to just give a shout, mention the organisation's name that you created? I don't think you
Yes.
did.
So the nonprofit that my friend and I co-founded was We Matter Too, INC. Uh, so what we do is we peer support for mental health, and we do that through Twitter. Um, And then we offer resources. We also use first person narratives to help kind of combat stigma and discrimination and all of that. So we do a few things and we want to grow, of course, but you got to start somewhere. So that's where we've started.
You do amazing things, and it's funny you talk about that mental health stigma and everything. It's like it comes up with you might have caught the beginning of it when you joined on the channel. We talk a lot about the stigma of that side of things when it comes to chronic pain, and a lot of the conversations we have around chronic pain, it's not the actual being in pain bit that causes the problem. It's the how you're perceived to be dealing with it, or how you perceive to have caused it, or how you perceive to
Yeah.
be, you know, contributing to it. And people don't realize that they're all branches of the same tree, and we've got to try and remove that for the people that, the people that have mental illness, but also the people that are judged for I'm going to start jumping into bits of your book in a minute, but there was a bit in your book where you talked about that whole you have a brain and you're a person, and those experiences of what makes you you are valid. And yeah, that really stuck with me. So I feel like that seems like a good point that we should probably talk about the book. um so I'm at a two. I'm going to hold it up for you guys. I know Ashley's probably going to hold it up as well, and I will put a link in chat for you watching it live where you can get it from. um First of all, I suppose, where did this start? How long? Because a lot of people, I know, when they write their first book, especially when they're sort of lived experience, it can be quite a long journey. Was that your experience?
Yes. So actually, back in 2019, when it was all happening, so it took me 3 years really to write it and perfect it, but and it's still not perfect. I mean, I'm still finding errors, but um, I was so mad at what had happened that I sat down and started writing it. So those discrimination chapters are the first ones I wrote because I was so mad. I was so angry. Um, and of course, I, after I had gotten a lot of it written, I put it down and I put it away. For most of the 2020, it was put away because, of course, the pandemic,
There was a
like,
small matter of the pandemic. Yeah.
right, and I had a young child at the time, and I was, like, dealing with that.
Yeah.
So, I had set it down and put it away, and when I finally brought it back out and I started reading, I go, "Whoa, I was mad." And I was like, so, clearly needed to clean it up a little bit because
I was
no
going
one
to
wants.
actually, that was going to be one of my questions. Was it sort of because sharing something like this as a raw experience and doing it for the first time, I imagine as much as it is therapeutic, it can be a bit of a runaway train. I know when I used to do blogging, when I started at the same sort of time, 2019, did you have to edit it down a little bit? And how much of that
Well, and
rawness, I
so
suppose, do you think you managed to keep?
so what I did was is I actually had 4 people read this before I published it. So I did have it go through, even though I self-published it, I did still have it go through a peer review process because being a academic at heart, I still wanted it to go through a process where I had peers read it. So I actually had a friend who's a pharmacist read it for me. I had a friend who is a librarian read it for me. And then I had 2 people who were friends, but more on the lay side. I wanted to make sure they understood what I was saying and it was not too medical. So I wanted to hit certain areas when with the people reading it before I published it to make sure I was doing what I wanted to do and hitting certain areas. So it was read prior to me publishing it to get feedback from people. And my one friend who's a pharmacist said to me, "You can't take the pain and the anger and the frustration out of those discrimination chapters." And I said, "Are you sure? They're still like a little angry." And she was like, "No." She was like, "Stop being worried about making people uncomfortable. That's what you need. You went through a really tough situation. You need people to be uncomfortable because that's what it was and that's what it is. And you shouldn't have been put in that situation. Therefore, you need to tell it exact like that." And so that's when I realized I needed to even though I wanted to tell a raw and filtered story, which was the point of this, I still wanted to make people comfortable.
Yeah.
And I was still worried about making people uncomfortable. So that's when I wrote the very first part where I tell people I'm probably going to offend you and you need to be okay with that. Um, because the point of this book is not to sugarcoat stuff and it's not to make you feel comfortable. The point of this book is to be raw and real. And so you need to be okay with the fact that I'm going to ruffle feathers, I'm going to make you uncomfortable, and I'm going to offend you because a lot of the stuff I talk about is exactly that.
Yeah, you've actually. It was one of the things I was going to bring up because for me that set the tone perfectly, and I've had similar experiences when I share my story, like more of a, like from a public speaking sort of thing. In that if you're not making people a little bit uncomfortable, or you're not hitting something on an emotional level, I don't feel like you're going to have the maximum impact. But some people aren't. Like I think you summed it up perfectly in the introduction where you talked about, if you're not ready to have those conversations, or that sort of, I can't remember exactly how you worded it, but that conversation with yourself, or if you're not willing to sit and listen, put the book down. And that, I think, because I think that
Hmm.
is genuinely true, because you can't go in, you need to go into it with that open mind. And I think what you've done really well at the start there is you got people to sit up and listen, and they kind of knew straight away what they were in for. And I think that helped, because
Yeah.
so many of those things, it takes, it can take a long while to get in. And I think you nailed that. And I was really interested when you said about when you started, because that's really put me off, that whole, that anger, that raw emotion. I was a really angry person in 2019 with what I was going through with my chronic pain experience. I had lots of people on my, it was like a blog and thing back then, so I should put this in a book. But I know if I would have put that into a book there and then, I probably would have looked back at it and cringed now, because I didn't understand what was sat with me, what responsibility sat with somebody else. I just wanted to blame everyone and see the world burn. So clearly you went about that the right way and sort of revisiting it, I guess.
Yeah, and I have every version. Like I have them all because they're all hard copies and I went through and like edited them by hand. So I have each version.
Yeah.
So I and then you can see the progression as I went from very angry, and I was like, I would read it and I'd be like, okay, we need to not blame the entire world for what happened. It was a small group of people who did this, and so I need to not blame all the readers for what happened, right? I need to blame these very specific people. And then even when my editor read it, who's my best friend, he was like, "Okay, Ashley, I know you're not blaming the readers in this moment. You need to be specific about who you're blaming." And I'm like, "Thank you." And so then I, go and change it so that he was even catching the ones that I hadn't caught to make sure I wasn't blaming the wrong people.
And I genuinely, I do think it comes across though, because I've read a few sort of like lived experience things, and sometimes it can be like very like doctor bashing, like in the circles I've been operating in, and like trying to explain to people, well, we kind of all want the same thing, but the doctor doesn't have enough time. You didn't get the desired outcome. We need to work together to address that issue and make appointments times longer, and all them sort of things. And sometimes people can't take themselves out of that space to see it from that
Mhm.
different perspective. And you will know from your background, there's a lot in like CBT and mental health support that talks about shifting that perspective and seeing things from different angles and that. And I think, yeah, I think that comes across. You should be proud of that, because yeah, you
Thank you.
could have just gone in guns blazing and tore through.
Yeah. Well, and I was very intentional when I was going through because there are places where I do lay blame.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was very intentional about where I put blame on certain places. And I did it intentionally because at those points, I wanted people to think about, well, maybe I should think more about what I'm doing in those situations because I need to do better for other people.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we go into situations, and even I'm to blame, like even me, and I'm writing my own book. And so I even blame myself. And so it's really, I had to be very careful when I was going through and editing it to think about I put how I was with blame because of the topics that I was talking about.
Yeah. And I think yeah, I say I've already said it, but I think you handled that really well. And the thing is, the important bit is people lived experience matters, and maybe we can get onto that for a little bit. And that
Mhm.
people you've got, if that was your experience, that was your experience. You shouldn't feel guilty for saying how that felt. You know, I talk a lot about, I didn't lose a job. I kind of had to. I decided to jump before I was pushed a long time ago. And looking back, I realized I was in a really bad mental health space. I didn't had no confidence. I weren't strong enough to fight back. And looking back, if it was Joel the advocate now in that situation, I would have caused hell to fight that situation. Um,
Mm,
and sometimes I think to myself, if when I used to do blog posts about that, and I'd feel guilty about digging that up, and or maybe I got it in the, maybe I misinterpret something, or maybe I didn't see the whole picture. But then I had to sort of remind myself, well, no, that was my experience, and as the patient, that was what happened to me. So it's kind of important that we share how that feels, and people aren't always going to want to hear it, unfortunately. But if that was your experience, then it's valid, isn't it?
absolutely. Absolutely. I actually just had the experience today because I am just now finding out that I'm autistic.
Oh, okay.
Literally within the last 2 months. And so it has brought up this wonderful learning experience for myself that, wow,
Yeah.
well, here I am learning all of this situation. And now my lived experiences are getting this new layer.
Yeah, and different
And
perspective, I
so,
suppose, as well on that.
exactly. And so my discrimination experience now has this new layer. And so I hate to, as you said, dredge up the past, but I needed to. So I reached out to somebody who I actually talk about in the book as the only person who ever apologized to me for this experience, for this discrimination experience. And I texted him. I haven't talked to him in a year and a half because when I went through the experience and I needed to heal, I decided the core group of people I needed to separate myself from, even the one positive person, because unfortunately all of it was just too much for me and it was too negative. So I even had to separate myself from the positive person, which I knew he would never hold against me. But that means I haven't talked to him in a year and a half. So I reached out Friday. Yes, Friday, and said, I need to talk to you. I'd love to catch up, but there's something I also need to tell you. Um, and he texted back. So we talked. Actually, that's who I was on the phone with. Um, and he, being the wonderful person he is, I told him what happened. And he said, Ashley, first of all, that is nothing you have anything, it doesn't change anything about you, first of all. And second of all, he's like, I'm sorry that this now adds a whole new layer for you. And again, is apologizing for something that one, he had nothing to do with, and two, he's just being the good person that he is. And I fully believe that he's just the only person who ever really cared about the whole situation. And I hated to bring up the whole horrible situation all
Yeah,
over again,
yeah,
but he's the only one who's ever validated everything that happened to me and took the time to make me feel like I was heard when it came to this situation. And now we've reconnected. We're gonna stay in contact because I'm in a better place when it comes to my PTSD from the situation. But now I have my friend back, but he also validated the whole situation. So, as you said, sometimes when it comes to our lived experiences, yeah, it stinks to bring them back up, but sometimes it's a good thing too,
yeah,
because sometimes you just need to be validated and have someone hear it.
yeah. And I think and I suppose I should say at this point, for anyone listening to this back or watching live is wondering about all the missing gaps, it's just to avoid us going back over Ashley's story in details. We really covered that in depth last time. So if anyone wants to hear that, go back and listen to that episode. But it's really bad, isn't it? That I'm already thinking when you were telling me about that new diagnosis, the lived experience in me is thinking that's just something else that people can blame Ashley's response on, or and or how you react to these situations, or how you perceive these situations. And it shows you the world we live in, that, as a patient, I'm already thinking, oh, that's another thing where you can just say, well, it's because you're autistic, and it's just, it's sad that
Yeah.
that's the case. But I don't know if you had similar thoughts, or if that's just from my experience.
Well, I for me, it explained my whole life,
Yeah,
first of
fair
all.
enough. Yeah,
I mean, like, for me, I mean, I took I took the screening test, and my friend Amy I'm laughing because it makes me giggle. I was taking the test, and I go, "Is it supposed to explain my whole life?" And she goes, she goes, "I have news for
was it written for me?
you." She's like, "I have news for you." And I started laughing. I go, "Oh, I know what this means." So, I mean, it was very telling. So I have formal testing set up for February, but I mean, let's be real. I already know. But then, as you peel back the onion, as you're like now depicting your entire life, because now I'm 38, I'll be 39 in November. So now I'm like pulling apart my whole life. And I'm like, how did I make it? Like, how did I make it this far? One. And two, now I'm like, all these times I've been bullied, harassed, abused for things my brain is literally not wired to understand.
Yeah,
And then again, I went back to this whole discrimination thing where I literally told people, I don't understand this situation, or I need you to stop because this is too much for me. Because again, I was overstimulated. I was melting down in front of everybody, and it all makes sense why.
yeah,
and and I just and now you have this new layer of messed up that I'm like, they bullied an autistic person, and whether they knew it or not, it
yeah,
doesn't really make much difference. It's just gross. So having the phone call today with him, the fact that he was just like, I'm sorry that you're learning this, and this adds a new layer to it for you. And it was a typical response from him. And I knew he'd care. And that's why I reached out to him. And for him to listen was, again, I think just what I needed
yeah.
so I can
It's
move
that
forward
validation
because,
thing as well, isn't it? Just for someone who's been, I think there was somewhere in the book where you talked about that whole, you know, I can't remember how you worded it. Sorry, because I read it like over a course of a longer period, and it was along those
okay,
lines of like, you know, in the moment and how you experience it, and when you reflect back on that, sometimes those experiences can feel differently. And I can't remember the exact bit, but that really stuck with me. So I suppose having that now, that explanation, and then having that at the same time reconnecting with somebody who went through them that period with you, that must be sort of
hmm,
really powerful for you, and must feel like you've suddenly got some support for that period of your life.
yeah. And because for me, I never got nobody, nobody from the organization. I've never gotten an apology, like an official. Nobody's ever done anything, nothing, ever. So he's the only one who's ever apologized. And I mean, he didn't do anything. He never did anything to me, ever. He's the only one who's taken accountability. He's the only one who spent hours on the phone with me, learning from the experience, um, asking me questions on how he can do better, um, breaking it down so he could do better. So, of all the people, like, he is the least of my problems
Yeah,
within that organization. So, so when I reached out, I told him, I said, if you don't want to talk, I totally understand because I respect you. Because I know I'm bringing something up that after 3 years, nobody wants to talk about still. I'm the one who lives with it every day, and I totally understand that. Like, I live with it every day. Other people don't need to hear about it, but if you're willing, I'd appreciate it. So the fact that he did it, and he listened and was empathetic about it. That's what meant so much to me. And so I appreciate that. And when people do that for others, that's what means something.
Yeah.
It's the others that like stomp all over it and tell you to get over it, and all the stereotypical things
Yeah,
you
yeah.
hear, you know.
We've already talked
And
about
I
some of
want
those things already tonight before you arrived. It's crazy how often that comes up. It really is.
and I actually want to read the paragraph because there's a paragraph in here about him, and I want to read it. And it says, only one human being has apologized to me and taken accountability for not doing better for me. Not their fault, nor did I feel they should shoulder this burden because they had some involvement due to the positions they held. For this individual to step up, take responsibility for apologizing to me, and then asking questions to learn from the experience was appreciated beyond words. I would describe them as a phenomenal and amazing human being. Instead of getting defensive and taking everything personally, they have decided to become a better leader by learning from the mistakes other people made. They're able to see everything which went horribly wrong, and they'll make sure it never happens again. Our friendship survived a massive test, but I'm sad our friendship had to end, as the friendship triggered a lot of pain for me as time moved on, but it's one I cherish fondly. It's one I look back upon with smiles and not pain. Maybe one day I'll be able to have that friendship again, but I know in my heart when it mattered the most, they had my back.
And yeah, and that must feel so nice to have that sort of covered as well with recent events, because obviously books are a fixed moment in time, and
Right.
so you must be very conscious of that. And whilst you're on it, before we move away, you've talked about accountability a few times, and there was a bit quite early on in the book where you were talking about fixed mindset and growth mindset, and a character you call Matilda who blame everyone, and how you've got to own that really struck with me. So I don't know if you maybe for the audience listen want to explain that a little bit more, just because I think
Oh,
that
good old
plays into
Matilda.
that sort of plays into this situation a bit, doesn't it? In that whole, I talked earlier about how you've got to stop trying to burn the world down sometimes and own
Yeah.
situation. So yeah, do you want to give us a bit of info on that?
So Matilda, oh, good old Matilda. So Matilda was my blow and go. I don't know how it works over in the UK, but the blow and go was when I got my DUI back in 2013. The blow and go was the thing that got put in my car so that I could continue to drive
Oh,
for
okay.
a
Yep.
year,
Yep.
um, while I was on probation. So one day I was driving home from work, and unfortunately, every 20 minutes while you're driving, it beeps and you have to blow in it to make sure
Okay.
you're not drinking and driving actively, you know? And it was beeping, and I was like, oh my gosh, so annoying. And I just happened to call it she. And I was like, it would make it a heck of a lot more fun if I just named this thing, because then I could make really crude comments about her. Um, because that's just how I am. So I named her Matilda, and then I started to make really rude comments about it. Like, hold on, Matilda's really needy. I gotta blow her. So that was me. I apologize, but it's just how I am. So when I read the book, Growth Mindset, um, the author, Carol Dweck, talks about naming that mindset that always wants you to do the wrong things or the not so great things. And she talks about naming it. And I'm like, what the perfect name, Matilda. It'll remind me of, and it makes me giggle. But I mean, it's not really a great mindset to have. And Matilda is not really a great thing that happened in the past. So perfect name, Matilda. So that mindset is that one that always is kind of more or less the the one we don't necessarily want to be doing. It's the closed-minded side, right? The not so great side of the mindset. I go with the closed-minded more because it makes me think of clothes, right? That fixed mindset, that closed-minded thought process where we're not thinking about being open-minded, or we're judgmental, um, and we're less open to those ideas that, we're more or less. When I started doing this work, I started to really focus more on people and meeting people than anything else. I don't care about what they do, where they come from, who they are. It's just people. People. I'm meeting people. And whatever else that's behind that, it doesn't really make much difference to me. If they are college educated, if they have a job, if they I just don't care. Like it's a human being standing there or on the other side of a phone, computer, whatever they're using. If they're going to have a conversation with me, then that's all that matters to me. The rest of it is really null and void. So I've tried to keep this very open mindset of it's just another human being having a conversation with me, and the rest of it doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I just that bit. I think that was probably the first page. It come quite early on. It was one of the first pages. I thought, oh yeah, I'm hooked now. I just the fact that because it was just really for me, it was really refreshing. Somebody who was looking at everything that you've been through and everything we talked about on the previous episode, and being able to look at saying, yeah, I'm going to own these issues, and you talked about the growth mindset side of things, and I don't know, it just for me it just felt refreshing. And like I say, as somebody who's read a few of these sort of lived experience books, um and I just do my how do you feel about me reading out a couple of bits like I
Go for it.
don't I know
Please,
some
by all
people might
means.
prefer to do it themselves, but there was a bit that we talked about this earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt any of the flow. And there was a bit where you sort of like say, this book is straightforward and honest. This is what happened to me, my lived experiences. I cannot strip down the stories to remove the parts which make people people uncomfortable. If I remove the gut wrenching emotional pain or the ignorant comments somebody made, I sterilize the story. I make the story more palatable. And the point is to feel uncomfortable because there is nothing comfortable about these experiences. If we hide from how these stories make us feel, then we ignore the real problems they unveil. And I think that for me, everything we've talked about up until now, I think that is the sort of tone for how you went about this. So yeah, just well done for that, because I think the easy option, especially like the fact that you're saying you went out your way to get editors and multiple peer reviewers, and it would have been very easy to sort of, I don't know, is commercialize it the right word, but you know what I mean, to make it more palatable for the
Yeah.
person reading it. And the fact that right from the off you're saying, I'm not doing that because you need to be uncomfortable to understand what I went through. I think that really struck a chord with.
Yeah, and even last night, we went to the baseball game last night, and I was talking to my husband about something, and a lot of times when I meet people or I speak to groups, um, it's hard for me to get a read sometimes when I meet people because, again, I'm a lot. Um, when I talk about when I talk to groups or when I talk to people and I talk to people about what I talk about, it's a lot.
Yeah.
So I never really know sometimes with some people whether they like me or not because or like what I have talked about because again, it's a lot to process. And I'm okay with that. Like I'm totally okay with that because I understand how much it is. And it was hard for me to get a read on somebody. And Kurt had talked to him last night and he said, your family is really awesome. And I was like, oh, he thinks I'm awesome. Cool. I didn't think he did because I was like, I wasn't getting a very good read on him because again, I'm a lot. So it's like, you never know because again, these topics aren't exactly comfortable. So I'm like, I wasn't sure if he thought I was okay or not.
And I don't know
So I was like,
how you feel, but like I find as well, like for all the negative experiences, and like I say we talk about them a lot on this channel and show and everything, no matter how comfortable you are with them and comfortable talking about them, it doesn't mean you don't still carry that in other ways. So people think I'm really confident because I'll sit in front of audiences and talk about my story and talk about suicidal thoughts and how it makes me feel to live with psoriasis rashes and stuff like that. But it doesn't mean that when I'm meeting new people, in the back of my mind, there is still that voice of like, is this too much to handle? Are they focusing on your rashes? Are they uncomfortable? Because it doesn't matter how confident and open you are about your story, you still carry those negative experiences, don't you?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I I I can talk about it and talk about it and talk about it for hours, right? And I look seamless, and I look like I have no issues at all. But in the back of my mind, I'm trying to get a read on the person or who or group or whatever to make sure they're receiving it well. I'm a very observational person. Uh, Probably comes from the autism and everything, like trying to get the read on people to make sure that I'm not off-putting or something, I guess. But making sure I'm not coming off wrong or whatever, I read people to make sure that they're receiving the information I'm giving. Um, and so that's always constantly something I'm watching for the people in front of me. And so this person I had not been able to get a vibe or read from. And so to hear that he thought I was awesome, I was like, yes, I have not scared him.
What you might have done if we had reacted like that in front of him, though. Could you imagine? It's like
uh,
you're trying to high five and
I
everything.
I mean, you know, I was
Yeah.
watching a football game at a baseball game, so
Yeah,
I
you
don't
could have carried it
know.
off, yeah. The other bit I wanted to ask you about in your book, is that it was really clear that you put a lot of effort into the research, and some of the numbers you shared were like staggering, for me. And I already kind of half knew some of this stuff about the amount of people that are impacted by mental health issues and this sort of thing. I suppose there's probably a couple of questions there, but like one, maybe share with us why you felt that that was important for this type of book. And obviously, I appreciate your career probably influences that a little bit. And two, I suppose, as second part to that, was there anything that shocked you, even with all that you've been through and you went through during your research, or that stuck with you that you sort of learned along the way whilst doing it? Sorry, I've thrown you two fairly hefty questions.
No, 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 it's okay. Um, so I am totally a research person just because of my job. Um, and I knew if I was going to write a book like this, I better back it up with some evidence. And I wanted to make sure that it was it carried weight. And I think as a pharmacist, in order to carry weight, sometimes if it's got research in it, it'll carry some more,
Yeah.
especially in my career. So I wanted to make sure I did it correctly. Um, so that's why it has the research in it. I also wanted to do something with the way as I got my diagnoses, it also had the clinical with my lived experience so that you could see, okay, this is the medical jargon that they're going to like throw at you, pair it up with how I experience it. So you can kind of see both. Um, because I mean, I am no fan of the DSM-5, but that's what we have. um,
Just do I just explain that for anyone that's not familiar?
yes. So the DSM-5 is what we use to diagnose people with mental health issues, mental disorders. There are other diagnostic tools, but mostly we use the DSM-5. In the States, it's what we use for like insurance companies, along with the ICD-10 codes. A lot of medical jargon, I know, but it's what we use to like bill insurance companies and such.
Right.
I'm not exactly sure how they do it in the UK. I don't know how the system works.
The NHS
Um,
has just joined a very long waiting list.
yeah, that's what it seems. I've helped one of my friends navigate it, and it was not a fun process. I did not enjoy watching from afar. Let's just say that much. Um, but yeah, we use a lot of it to help diagnose, and then we use codes to bill. So, but it's so what I wanted to do is again, like a lot of times people hear all of these diagnostic terms and then they're like, what does all this mean? So I wanted to take those terms and everything and kind of put it along with what I feel and experience so that they could kind of see what it looks like in a person. Um, and then along with my stories and how kind of like, and I put it in a timeline, right? So
Yeah.
it goes from childhood all the way through to my discrimination, and I put it in time order. Um, and then I added in the research where I felt, because I talk about stigma, and I put that in the beginning because stigma, of course, gets sprinkled throughout. And I really wanted to touch on that at the beginning because, like you mentioned, we get these diagnoses and we get these issues and we deal with them, but really it's that stigma on top of it that adds this extra problem,
Yeah.
which isn't really part of the disease per se, but it's this whole other level of problem that we have to navigate, um, which adds more stress. Um, and then what did I learn? Well, I learned that we don't take care of postpartum depression very well. And I was very not happy about that. And if I had more time, I'd do something about that, but I don't.
Yeah, you got to pick
um,
your battles. You can't fix everything.
yeah, I was very not happy because I was like trying to find more and more information. So, like, I can only do so much research to find what I need. And as I was trying to find what I needed to do the chapter in the book, I couldn't find what I needed. And I was getting really mad. I'm like, I just need what I need. But I can't find what I need. And I'm like, this is really mad. I'm like, I'm getting really frustrated. And I was like, this isn't good. Like, I should be able to go, like, I should be able to find it in like a few steps. And if I can't find it in a few steps, that's not good. Um, and that's when I came to the conclusion that, like, so the more time I spend on Twitter, I'm finding that this isn't an unknown problem. Like, this is a known problem that we are not doing as good for moms. And now we have some more resources, and we have a dedicated crisis line for moms
Right. Okay, that's good.
here in the states. And I don't know it off the
No,
top of my head.
there's not going to be a test. Don't worry. But because like in our experience with my partner and everything, like we found out if there's anything wrong with a baby, you'll get somebody to look at them straight away. You literally no queuing, everything, and we're going to really miss that as he gets older because you get a little bit used to that. You just walk in, someone's going to sort it. But what I found my experience with my wife as the husband, the other person in the relationship, is that everyone talked about it, but once that first couple of weeks were out of the way, if I needed to actually, red flag something on her behalf, I don't think I felt entirely confident I would know where to go and how to do that. But it was talked about loads. So the awareness that that issue exists was there. And to the point I even remember saying, like, don't forget dads can get it too. And I very much did struggle. But mine would come a lot later. It was that sort of like, in a very different way to what the person giving birth would maybe go through of the hormonal changes and everything. But mine was very much that sort of like everything's changed kind of thing. And yeah, I don't know if I would have known after them first couple of weeks where everybody's interested, where you then go for help. And like you say, if it's taken you that long to research it, you can make that
Yes,
assumption that the support isn't accessible, because if it's taken that long to research it, then what are you
yes,
supposed to do as a patient who needs help?
yes. And for me, my postpartum depression didn't like my symptoms and everything that ended up with me hospitalized didn't happen 8 months and after I had my child.
Mm. Yes, there we go.
So
Classic.
it wasn't even right after. It
Uh,
was like long, and I was on medicine for my anxiety and everything else. So, like, of course, I didn't connect to any. And the thing is they say it can happen even up to a year later.
mm,
So, like, I'm like, why why aren't we telling women or anyone this for
yeah.
that matter? Like, I'm like, this is not all stuff that I didn't even know, and I'm a medical professional. Like, how? So that's why I was just like, I was mind boggled. And so this is why I was like, again, I don't have the time, but I was like, this is wild to me.
Do you find that I we haven't touched a lot on advocacy tonight, but like do you find that like that's a real struggle where once you're aware of the issues exist and you start seeing them, um I had one just this week regarding diversity in the UK with people that are talking at various events and being recognized in the community, and I suddenly thought, if I wasn't me, would I feel represented? Do you find that once you get turned on to that advocacy thing and you start embedding yourself into that space, that overwhelming feeling of I see so many problems and there's only so much I can influence? Like, how do you find that has a like, because as therapeutic as advocating is, and that's 90% the reason why I do it, do you find that there's that fine balance between where it then becomes like a negative impact or influence on your mental health?
Yeah, I've had to really just say, I cannot solve all the world's problems. I am one human being, and I have to just stay with what I do
Yeah,
and say somebody else will have to do that because I want to help. I want to do it all, and that's just my nature because I know about the problem. I'm like, oh, I want to help. I want to
yeah,
do it.
exactly
We
that.
need to fix it. It's all the problems. Like, oh my gosh, I think of all the patients and all the people and all the things, and then I'm like, okay, I gotta let it go because I can't. I can't. I literally can't. Or
It takes a long way to learn
again.
that skill, though, doesn't it? I know for me, like I don't know how you coped with how your Twitter blew up, but for me, in the early days, I would do a bit of blogging, and people would get in touch, and you'd wait and wait weeks and weeks, and then when you get a message, you were like overwhelmed and dead happy, and like you're trying to answer all their queries and signpost them to everything, and then all of a sudden, you fast forward a couple of years, and it is like, oh, I get on average now 50 to 200 messages a week, and I don't really have a following. That's just across social media in general, and that is really difficult knowing when to engage, when not to, when to signpost with the ones you maybe can't help, and also pick out the ones that are sort of potentially various misleading and trying to sort of con you into something as well, unfortunately. So did you have that issue with the whole one-to-one? Because I think here in the UK we talk about the NHS will talk about levels to peer leadership, and like level one is like you're trying to help yourself, and level two is you're trying to help those around you. Then at some point you get to level three where it's kind of I'm going to make change, but it does mean that you can't do that on an individualized level. Like, is that sort of experiences you've had as well?
So I just have gotten into a rhythm of just I fly by the seat of my pants. That's just what
At
I
least you're
do.
honest about
I you know,
it.
people are like they've got these schedules and they do all these and I'm like, I just go. Like I just fly by the seat of my pants. I have nothing scheduled. I just do what I do and people will ask me all these questions. I'm like, do you do those things? Like I ask, I'm like, do you? And they're like, well, yeah, I have to. And I'm like, oh, I don't. Um, I just, uh, you know, I just sit and I just respond. I just am in the moment and I just do it. And I've just gotten in the habit of going with it. And I don't, and it doesn't, I don't feel like I spend that much time on it. My husband might beg to differ,
Different
but
perspective again.
maybe, but I, I get everything else done. Um, uh, now I'm learning that I have to stop doing everything myself.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
Like marketing this book, I need to stop doing that on my own. And I am gonna maybe talk to somebody doing that for me because I need to stop doing that on my own
It
because
just it just escalates so quickly, doesn't it? And that's that sort
it
of like,
has.
and there's only so many places. Like, yeah, I've thought about, do I come off a platform? And the other thing I've got to try and do as well, I personally I over apologize, always have done. So I didn't get my podcast out last month, so I'm like sad sorry a while, or to these guys when I can't make it because I'm unwell, and they're the first to say you don't need to say sorry, chronic illness stream, blah, blah. But it's really hard because once you start realizing you might be having an impact, it consumes you. But like I say, at some point you do have to I used a term the other day which my wife absolutely hated. I'm going to use it again now, but it's like I can't remember what the source. It came from like an author or somebody famous, like learn when to like. I think they phrased it "kill your darlings," and I said "kill your babies," which I realised is probably a crueler way of putting it. But is that like you create these things, and then as you grow, you realise you can have more impact here or I can have more impact there, and I don't know about you, my priorities changed. So I went from thinking where can I get, where can I get an audience, to where can I actually improve things. And now I don't care if I'm doing it only to 5 people. If that's having the real world change, then I'm happy to burn, so like the blogging that really hurt me to let go of that, because that's how I started and I love writing and I've always been good at writing, and I'll always say I'm a bit of a fraud when it comes to streaming and content creation and public speaking. But you realize that's the areas where you can have that impact. And I think you're probably going to find that as well, because if your book has that impact, people are going to start asking you for a second one, Ashley, and then they're going to want you to talk about it.
So there might be a tiny, like, there is already a second one in the
There we
works.
go.
But that was like I had to take so much out of the first one.
Right, yeah.
So, so there's like a book, like the myths of mental health was in this one.
Okay.
But I I took like 60 pages out of this book. So I already had it started.
That's good that you still
and
got that desire, because some people I've spoke to.
and since I'm finding out that I'm autistic, um, I was talking to my brother, and he goes, "Too bad you already published your book," and I'm like, "Well, too bad I already started another one." And he's like, "Of course you did." But I said it will be neat to write this part because everything else was written and I had to remember.
Yeah.
So it'll be neat to write this part because it'll be happening.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
That'll be a totally different writing experience as well, won't it? Like it'll feel like a lot more refreshing, I imagine. And because you must have, I know we probably should have covered this earlier, and I'm conscious of your time, but you must have had to drag yourself over a little bit, or open up some wounds to go through this process. I know you talk about this stuff a lot, but you're still having to revisit it to do something like put it on a page, aren't you?
yeah, and my grandfather's death is one that I have not dealt with ever. It's still tucked neatly in a box because when he died, I didn't deal with things. So his is still neatly in a box, tucked away somewhere. So when that one comes up, I don't really deal with it very well. So someday I'll deal with it appropriately, maybe. But that one is always that's actually the last chapter I wrote.
Yeah.
Because it still it takes me a bit because I just get mad and angry and pissed off and still want to find the dude who did it because it makes
Um,
me mad.
Must be. I've got to revisit that bit, because I originally took your book with me to Milan, and that's the first time I'd been more than like literally a night or two away from Dylan. And because of the whole pandemic, we spent a lot of time locked up indoors, and there were certain periods of the book where I thought I need to park that bit. And I think you even cover it at the start. You even said something in the start. I seem to remember. I really
Yeah,
should have this quoted where like if you need to take a break, and and
absolutely.
I remembered that, and I thought, yeah, I'm in a foreign country. I'm missing home. I've got a lot on my plate this week. I'm not going to read this bit before I go to bed. And so there are like I've read it in a bit of a scattergun order. I've got to go back to certain chapters because of that. But I love that you
That's
tackle it.
okay.
Yeah, and the fact, yeah,
And that's okay.
you make it feel acceptable to the reader as well, which I love from the start. You're
Even
saying,
my parents, both of my parents have read this, and it was not an easy read for either one of them because there's stuff in there that I've told them, but not to the extent that it's written. And so for them, even they had to put it down and walk away. And they said that reading that beginning part where it gave them permission to set it down and walk away, for them, even they said that they put it down and had to step away. And it took them a while to read it because they said they just had to. It was tough for both of them to read it.
imagine. And that must be quite a difficult process, because I know if I ever sat down to write my stuff, it's going to be really difficult. I'm going to have to go to my parents and say, like, I'm going to be commenting on experiences when I was a kid that might seem like you did something wrong, but you didn't. It's just how it felt for me. You know what I mean? And that's I think that's been my number one blocker because I'm not ready to have those really uncomfortable conversations. And so yeah, you need to give yourself a lot of credit for doing that. Because it's one thing us talking about this stuff on social media and you've done your TEDx talks and all this sort of thing. It's another thing when it is literally being delivered into the hands of people that are impacted by this story, isn't it?
My parent I've talked about my mom takes it a little harder than my dad, but my mom I told them both. I said, "I don't I don't blame you guys for any of this. We didn't know." Back in the 90s when I was in school, it's not like we talked about this stuff. And also, I never wanted to burden my parents with things. My parents had a lot going on. It's not like I mean, I'm the type that doesn't want to burden anybody. So I don't tell people the whole truth anyway. Um, I still don't do that. Still try to not do that. So I told them, I said, "Mom, Dad," I said, if you're gonna read this, I said, please know I don't blame you for whatever is in here. Please." Um, Mom still apologized. She did the other day. Um, and I told her, I said, "Mom, I've told you." She's like, "I know, I know. I just wanted to say it." And I was like, "Okay, I'm telling you though, I don't blame you." um, so it'll take my mom a while. I know it will. That's where I get my anxiety from. That's my mother. But they both, since I've been an advocate, they have both grown so much. Watching them grow in this space has been a remarkable thing. I'm so proud of both of them because they were very close-minded when I started this, and now watching them, they have opened their minds to the differences and the possibilities, and watching the two of them grow in this situation has been a pretty remarkable thing. So I'm actually very proud of my parents.
That's awesome that you yeah, that's been the outcome as well, because obviously a lot about what we talk about for mental health and those conversations, that isn't always that happy ending. And like I say, I know
Yeah,
for me, I've shared absolutely everything about my journey, but I still get sweats when I know that somebody close to me has decided to tune in or turn up at that event or whatever that might be, because it's that
yeah,
it's not a room of blank faces. All of a sudden there's that emotional connection, isn't it?
yeah.
So yeah, you need to give yourself credit for that. Um, Before, I'm conscious of your time because I know it's middle of the day, Sunday there. That's all right for me on a Sunday
Oh,
evening. I've got nothing better to do as the nights get darker. But
it's
I
okay. The boys
before
are at a baseball game. Take your
I
time.
was gonna, that's right, brilliant. And you are free to stick around and join us on the show. But in terms of our conversation, I'll wrap it up now. Um, Guys, I will put all of the links in the show notes for the podcast if you listen to this back, where you can get Ashley's book and where you can find Ashley. And I'll also do that in chat for those who watching live on stream. But for anyone that's only listened to this on audio, Ashley, just want to let people know where they can find you and also where they can get the book.
Yes, so you can find me on Twitter. I'm always there. um, literally. My handle is at because I matter. And then my book is on Amazon. So you can all get it there. Just lowered the price. So it's I Matter Too. It is on Amazon. That's probably the easiest place for everybody to find it. Is on Amazon.
I will link your site as well for the any American audience as well. Watch this back or listen to this back. And I'm going to put you on the spot here because I was reading this earlier and I thought it'd be great if you could end it by reading this. Sorry, so on Who I Am at the start of the book, since you've already proved you've got the book there in front of you. So on
Oh,
that very first page of Who I Am, you talk about um, the Dash by Linda Ellis as your sort of favourite poem. Would you be so kind to not to just read that poem, but then also read the paragraph under it that explains a little bit? Because I just think that's a really lovely way to end, and that was the first paragraph I saw in the book that really resonated with me. So you're comfortable doing that?
I of course can. Absolutely. For that dash represents all the time they spent alive on Earth And now only those who loved them know what that little line is worth. I want to impact those around me in a positive way. I want to help people. I want to empower them. When my time comes, I want to look back on the time which makes up my dash. And I want to know I lived my life to the fullest. I want to have pride in the way I lived and the impact I made. Then I will have lived my dash in between those dates.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Dr. Ashley Perkins.
Absolutely.
It was amazing. And it, like I say, if you want to stick around, please do, and I'll pose any questions in chat. But for those of you that listen on the podcast, thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm sure you'll be back again, and keep us posted with all the amazing work you're doing. And yeah, you certainly do matter. And thank you for everything you've done with this book.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.